In this episode, we will learn how to live courageously in a very risky world. Helping us with this is an author, a motivational speaker, personal development and leadership coach. He's the founder of Big, Bold, Brave, which is also the title of his first book. Welcome to the show, Clint. How are you doing?
Toby, I am doing awesome, man. It's an honor to be on your show today and super excited to have this conversation with you. So thank you. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you so much for making the time out to be on this show. I'm looking forward to having a very soulful conversation with you. I know the topic is not so easy to talk about because it has to do with the loss of a dear one, the loss of your teen son or your teenage son. Your son Gabriel, was killed in a solo plane accident in 2019. And that must have been very painful for you. I can imagine. So I'm so sorry for your loss, and so also commend or admire your courage and strength that you and your family had, to pull through that period of time, come out of it better, and also even use that story to bless the world. So thank you so much for everything that you and your family are doing out there. It's awesome.
Yeah,
It's
well,
great.
thank you for those kind words. I appreciate it.
Yes. So, but I would like to, learn from this story. I would like to learn from this phase of your life or your family's life in 2019 when all of this happened. Like, how are you able to process all of that loss and tragedy, and can you tell us the story of all of it all?
Yeah, well, Toby, I want to back up just a little bit because I do think there are different experiences and setbacks that even we had as a family or I had as a human being growing up that played factors into our ability to be able to process what ultimately is, a parent's worst nightmare. I have three boys. Gabriel was the oldest, and every parent wants to outlive their child. That's pretty common, right? We all want to, live life what we consider to be the normal way. And I would grow old and see him accomplish all of his dreams and get married and have kids and be a granddad and all that stuff. And that wasn't to be our story. But I do think
Mm.
you have to back up a little bit. So if I could just quickly, I'll give you a little bit of recap. I'd experienced some things growing up that were tough. I had a situation when I was 12 that my dad cheated on my mom, which, lots of people have experienced that. But my mom didn't respond to it well. My dad actually moved out for about 2 years and they eventually reconciled. They actually ended up married for over 65 years. Both passed away about 8 years ago. So I'll kind of fast forward through that part of the story. We had a great relationship in my adult years. So that was redemptive. But at 12, my mom ended up suffering from suicidal ideation, tried killing herself multiple times, a couple of
Mm.
different times, almost killed me in the process. One in a speeding car. She had been drinking and just decided she wanted to end it all. And we spun out going at a very high speed. And, thankfully we didn't hit anything and survived that. And then another time with a handgun where she was going to shoot herself. And, so there were some things that happened early on that were really tough. And, I think part of it for me was, even though in those early days I didn't have good coping mechanisms, I didn't know how to develop a mindset that would continue to push me forward in healthy ways across the board. But I did
Mm.
develop a resiliency. I knew I didn't want my past to dictate my future. And so, I'm going to fast forward really quickly. I went through a divorce. I went through drug abuse for many, many years. I mean, just there was Toby had a train wreck experience
Mm.
throughout my life at different times, but
Mm.
still kept believing that there was something better. And then for me at 30 years old, one of the huge things that happened was I was not a religious person. I didn't, I didn't consider myself someone who was religious by any stretch, but through a series of events, I ended up deciding that I would go into a church one day as a guest and just kind of see. I had some friends that just seemed to operate differently and had more peace than I did. And it seemed like when things went against them, they seemed to be able to respond better than I did. So I went one day just curious, about this thing that they did. And that's how I saw church. But ultimately, I ended up giving my life to God that day. And I was 31 years old, actually, at the time. And so that began my foundation of faith. And so, a lot of what we're going to talk about, your listeners are going to have to keep that in the background, because that's definitely a huge part of how I've been able to move through and if I could even say be victorious in a lot of areas of my life, even though I've been dealt some pretty tough blows. So I want to lay that foundation. But ultimately, what ended up happening with Gabriel is he had a dream from the time he was about 8 years old. He had went up in a small aircraft with his uncle Danny and loved it and decided he wanted to become a pilot. And so his parents, obviously we loved him and we wanted him to be able to fulfill his dreams. And ultimately, by the time he got to his teenage years, some opportunities opened up and he was able to do that. And at 16, he actually soloed in a plane before he even had a driver's license here in the States, which was kind of a weird experience for us. And then at 17, he got his private pilot's license, which was his first dream, his first big goal. And as you stated, several months later, and that was on September 23rd of 2019, he was just getting his hours, which is what pilots do when they're, trying to move towards being a commercial pilot. And after dropping off a friend safely on his return trip, he ended up running to an unexpected weather system and he crashed his plane into a side of a mountain and lost his life. And so, as you stated, it's a devastating blow. And for those who are listening right now who have experienced something like that, they know the pain is crushing. And we still experience pain, Toby. I mean, it's been less than 4 years, and there are certainly still painful moments. But what really ended up happening for us is that very first morning, my other two sons at that time were 9 and 14 years old. And I was forced, it was a very long night. I won't take your listeners through the whole thing, but we knew he disappeared off a radar at about 8 o'clock at night on a Monday night. And then there was a series of misinformation, not getting information from the search and rescue team that was in charge of finding him, news agencies reporting stuff that they weren't even supposed to know. It was a crazy night. And we let our boys sleep. And then by 3:30 a.m. is when we found out he was indeed gone. So when the boys got up at 7:30, I had to have the impossible conversation of letting them know what happened. And ultimately, that conversation we had was a new beginning for us, Toby. Ultimately, all we talked about was, I said, boys, we have two choices. And this has a lot to do with my experience. I was a pastor for 17 years as well. And so I've helped a lot of people through some really tough times, losing loved ones and sometimes children. And so I recognized there were certain things that I saw in people that seemed to walk through it in a healthy way. And then I had also seen tragic endings where marriages, got torn apart or families just got torn apart. So I told the boys, I said, listen, we have two choices. We can choose to focus on his death and just always think about what we're missing and the things we're not going to experience. And if that's what we do and that's what we focus on, then we're going to be shadows of who we're created to be. Basically, we're going to be trapped in that tragedy. But there's a second choice, and that is we can look at the way Gabriel lived. And now I use the term courageously. I had a different word at the time, but I say he lived courageously. That's what he did. He attacked life. He became a licensed pilot at 17 years old, which was a dream of his. He was an amazing photographer who did some really cool projects. He taught himself guitar. He graduated from high school a year early. I mean, he was just someone who, when there was something he wanted to do, fear was not going to stand in his way. Now, that's not to say he never experienced fear, right? I guarantee you the first time that the instructor got out of the cockpit, shut the door and said, go for it, I'm sure he was, and I had this conversation with him. He had fear, right? But he didn't let fear drive him. So that's what we talked about. We said, listen, we're going to live our lives by honoring him. And the way we're going to honor him is to begin to live our lives courageously. And so that was the new journey that we started out on. And ultimately, we haven't done that perfectly, Toby. We've had ups and downs since, and we're not perfect in this pursuit. But that was the tone that was set for our family almost 4 years ago. And ultimately, that would lead to me starting Big Bold Brave, which is my transformational speaking and coaching business, and then also writing the book Big Bold Brave.
Yes. Wow. Thanks so much, Clint, for sharing that. Thank you for taking us on that journey. I found that very important for you to share because, you know, we as human beings, we're made up of the things that we've experienced in the past, or, you know, circumstances of life. And that's why I'm so grateful that you talked about, you know, your parents and, you know, how things happen in their marriage and how that affected you, and how you know, also lived your life in the past to leading up to this moment too. And one thing I've learned so far from this story is that I love the fact that you've looked at the positive parts, basically. Like you had this positive mindset to look at the bright side of it all, you know. Yeah, you lost your son. It's very painful, it's very heavy, it's very tragic, but you still thought about, no, don't let's live in this dark moment, because we are going to become a shadow of ourselves. That's one thing I'm taking on from this conversation. Like,
Yeah.
don't don't stay in the pits of your sorrow or your pain. Try to climb out and find the light into your life again. That's something that spoke to me when you shared that. So thank you so much for that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, you're welcome. And I think that's, it's such a critical thing. When we think about it, we've all experienced gut punches, right? We don't know
Mm,
each other. We've just recently met, but I guarantee you, if you and I were to, stop this call and begin to talk, I'm sure that you have experienced some pretty tough things in your life, and everyone has. And I
mm,
also want to point out that COVID hit 3 months after Gabriel passed away.
mm,
So just a few months into our grieving process, the entire world was turned upside down. And there's so many people that are listening right now to you and I that suffered major losses as well. In some cases, it was a loved one,
mhm,
but loss is relative too. And one of the things that I want to be sure that our listeners are paying attention to today is, my story in losing a child, anyone who's lost a child, it is heavy and it is a horrible experience, but there is
mm,
no hierarchy of pain or loss. Pain and loss is relative. And so there's people listening right now that, during COVID, maybe they lost a loved one, or maybe they lost their job and their career, or maybe they had a business that they had just started to build and it was beginning to gain momentum, or in some cases had a business that had been thriving for 20 years and literally just because of what happened with COVID, lost it all,
mm,
loss. And then fear that comes with losing is something that affects everybody. And that has a lot
yeah.
to do with, the choices that I've made. And ultimately the reason why I wrote the book when I did, Toby, because, I didn't write this book solely for grieving parents or even someone grieving a loved one, although there is some very helpful things in the book about that. It was
Mm,
really more so about how do we live this life where the gut punches come. You don't have to ask for them. Nobody asks for them.
yeah.
At least I hope nobody
Yeah.
asks for them, right? I'm not asking for
No.
any, but
Mm,
ultimately they happen. And then how do you respond?
mm,
Because that's what's going to matter. That's what's going to frame the remaining days of your life, is how do you respond to the gut punches of life? And so, that's my mission. That's why I'm having this conversation with you. And so I'm really glad that you said what you said and are kind of leading us in that direction, because we really do. We need to help some people today that really do need to learn how to live courageously in the midst of tough times.
yes, yes. I totally agree with that. And we're going to talk about fear very soon. But one thing I would love to ask, which I find, you know, fascinating, is that, you know, it's one thing to, you know, experience a pain or a loss, sorry, something to experience a loss and to process the whole pain, the whole grief of it, and then try over the years to heal from it and just, you know, forget about it and let it go. And it's another thing to take all of that experience and then turn it to a purpose or to a leading or to a calling. So can you enlighten us on how you were able to then, you know, take your pain or turn your pain from this loss or disappointment of life into a catalyst for your purpose fulfillment, for a drive to, you know, help other people out there to even become better beings?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. I'm glad you asked that, and I'm going to give you a couple of things that I think, not only that I did, but I think that people can easily do themselves. It's not complicated, but it does
Mm,
require making some what I call courageous decisions. And so one of the first things that I think we should talk about is You have to distinguish the difference between pain and then moving forward with your life. Anybody who's lost a loved one probably despises the phrase, we just need to move on. Because we don't move on from losing people we love. That's a hole. That's a void in your life that is frankly going to sting the rest of your days. And it's something that what I like to say is I don't even, again, I'm a man of faith. I don't even pray for pain to go away regarding my son, because that pain represents the love that we share. However, I can be crippled by that pain and no longer live my life, no longer be the husband that I'm supposed to be, no longer be the dad to my other boys that I'm supposed to be, no longer have the impact and the influence that I believe God, created me to have and to be able to help people. So, we have to distinguish pain versus purpose, right? And so I've used a phrase many times. I didn't make it up. I just say, we need to give our pain a purpose. And I've heard some that don't like that phrase, but usually it's because they think I mean you're ignoring your pain. And that's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is you're going to feel pain. And just like I feel joy too. Let's not forget about that either. I have lots of fond memories with Gabriel. I have lots of experiences, and we do as a family, of things that we got to experience, things we did with him, the uniqueness of his personality, the dynamic that he brought to relationships. We also have great joy in those memories. But then there's times where it's just painful he's not here, right? So when you talk about giving your pain a purpose, what I'm talking about is simply you feel the pain. You don't try to ignore that it's there, but you make very intentional, very deliberate decisions to make sure that that pain doesn't keep you trapped from living your life. And so that can look different for a lot of people. For me, and I think you're going to love this. Part of what looking at his death, because death does become a reality, right? I mean, when they're not here anymore, it's in your face. It's no longer this awareness that everybody's going to die someday. You now have lost this person. And so, that was a challenge, and it still is at certain times. But I began to look at the way he lived and realize that I had cowardice in my life. That's part of what happened, Toby. I looked at the way he lived, only 18 years, just under 18 years. But the truth is he lived more in that 18 years than a lot of people live in an entire lifetime. And I'm not even just saying that as his dad. I've had many people that have known our family for years and knew him that would say the same thing. He was so adventurous. And so I began to look at my life and realize, wow, I'm doing some good, but there's a lot of areas of my life where I've been a coward. And what am I waiting for? Because another part of this is none of us are guaranteed tomorrow. Now, we all know that, but a lot of times we don't live that way. And so dreams that we've kept in our back pocket stay there for a year, 5 years, 10 years, 30 years. And next thing you know, they're nothing but a regret of things that we never did. And by the way, there's a lot of research behind that. The greatest regret, when people have been asked about what do you regret, something you did versus something you never did. And far and away, the data always come back the same. Most people regret things that they never actually tried, that they'd always dreamed about. So that's the trajectory that I went on. And in one of the ways that I was able to start doing that is by analyzing my life and looking at where those voids were. So writing a book was one of those things, Toby. I'd been encouraged to write a book for 15, 20 years from different people that I've known over the years. But I'd never done it. I was afraid. I was afraid of a whole bunch of different reasons why, and we can talk about that more later if you want. The coaching part of this, I was a pastor for 17 years. I've helped a lot of people, but for years I wanted to have a coaching business, at least on the side, where I could help anybody, regardless of their faith, regardless of where they were at in life when it comes to their belief system. Had never done it, and so I found that my personal pursuit of becoming a growth focused person, or having a growth mindset, and my desire to not give in to my own fears was the greatest catalyst of all to be able to start doing things that actually helped other people chase their dreams.
Yeah. That's good. I mean, talking about seeing the pain that you've experienced in life and taking that as a gift, you learn from it, you learn from that experience, and you take that as a gift to, maybe bless the world with, or even bless yourself, bless people around you with also. That helps you even pull out of that situation as quick as possible, or quicker than you could have, basically, because you see that opportunity in a very dark and lonely place where people might not see any opportunity, basically. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. So to me, that was, a huge part of what began the new journey, if I could say it that way.
Mm,
But I also want to point out that, as you start to think about, this courageous life and, how do we walk that out ourselves if we've been crippled with stuff in the past, you
mm,
also, you need help. You're not going to be able to probably do it on your own. And
yeah.
so I began to really value, even more than I ever did, the people that I surrounded myself with. You know, I look at this conversation that you and I are having. We obviously both had done research on each other, so we knew our mission and that we both had a desire to help people and to help people grow and to help
Mm,
people overcome things. Surrounding yourself with those kinds of people make a
mm,
huge difference as well. And even
yeah.
though I had a lot of life experience, that doesn't mean that I'm immune to feeling beat up or less than, or that maybe I'm an imposter or I don't have what it takes. And so,
Mm,
surrounding myself with people that not only I can encourage, but they encourage me as well. Not only that can I help them grow, but they help me grow. That's been a
mm.
really big part of this as well, in what I call this pursuit of living a big, bold, brave life.
Yes, yeah. And talking about Big Bold Brave, your book also, you talk about fear, and we've talked about it a lot already in this conversation. I would just love us to go into it already, because I want to learn so much from your experience with fear. You you said you had that fear of writing a book, and you were a pastor, but you still had a fear of becoming a coach, for example. So can you
Sure.
tell us a little bit about your experience with fear and how you were able to deal with all the fears that you experienced?
Yeah, well, we all face fear, right? I mean, that's the one.
Mm,
We have a lot of common things in our humanity, and experiencing fear is definitely one of those. So I've experienced all kinds
mm,
of fear. When I was a pastor, my first several years, I was a youth pastor. It was terrifying to get up and speak to a bunch of teenagers who, generally speaking, just have this, this like blank look, and they don't really respond a whole lot. And you're having a hard time telling, do you like what I'm saying? Do you hate what I'm saying? Do you like me? Do you hate me? What's going on? And so,
yeah.
those kinds of things I just push through, right? Some
Mm,
things you just have to push through. But I think one thing that's really critical is when we start to analyze our life and just how subject we are to fear, and where has fear created patterns that are not serving me well. You have to
mm,
take a deeper dive. And so one of the things that I wrote about in the book and that I like to talk about is, to me, there are essentially two kinds of fear. There are unnatural fears, and then there are natural fears. Now, quick, easy story to illustrate natural fears. I was out on a lake camping in Northern California with some friends of mine. We had pitched a tent. It was about 2 a.m. And we had, away from the tent, we had built a latrine, as people do when they go camping for a couple of days. And so
mm,
I got out of the tent to go relieve myself. Sorry, but that's what was happening. And as I
yeah.
started to step out of the tent, a friend of mine who was about 20 feet away was already outside. And he's like, "There's a bear." Now, I didn't believe him because this guy's usually not very honest. He's quite a storyteller, right? But then he
Yeah.
started moving his flashlight around. Sure enough, Toby, there was two bears. There was a mama black bear and a baby black bear. Well,
Oh,
dude, fear hit, right?
yeah.
That's
Yeah.
real fear because they were very, very close. And so, obviously we survived the night. It's all good. But that's what I call a very natural fear. We call it fight, flight, or freeze, right? That's
Mm,
something
mm,
in
mm,
the way we are created, that when there's a life or death situation, our brain is literally designed to push out all of the extra noise and
Mm.
hone in on or be laser beam focused on that thing that's a threat to our lives and figure out which way do we need to go? Do we need to fight? Do we need to freeze? Do we need to run away? That's very natural. So that's good. Not all fear is bad, but that's not most fear. And I don't know about you, but I don't encounter those situations very often. There's not many life or death situations for me. Now, there are people out there, people in the military, police officers, first responders, that can be a real day-to-day thing. So I don't want to minimize what they go for. I'm very thankful for those people who have chosen that path to protect us and do the things they do. But the
Yeah.
truth is, most of us don't have those kinds of fears. So we
Mm.
get crippled by unnatural fears. So what are unnatural fears? Basically everything else. So I talked about, being afraid to write the book. Some of my fears were, what if nobody wants to read it? What if I can't do it? What if I just am unable to even write the book? Just can't get it done. Well, those are very unnatural fears. They're unnatural because they're already determining a fixed outcome of bad things that are going to happen before
Yeah.
they have ever happened, and in all likelihood may never happen.
Mm.
And that's what unnatural fears do to us. It can happen where we have trauma in our relationships early on. I had to undo some trauma over the years from those early years of seeing what happens in a marriage when things implode. And there was a lot of things happen within that story that were really bad. And so I had to get some healing and some help, some counsel to get through some of those things, because those experiences caused me to be very fearful in relationships that I was trying to establish even 20, 30 years later.
Mm.
Rejection being one of them. I had
Mm.
the huge fear of rejection in a relationship, partly stemming from what I experienced as a child when my dad walked out and left us. My mom, didn't even value her life enough that she wanted to take her own. And in two cases, literally almost took mine.
Mm.
Rejection became a fear that became real, and it impacted my life because I had this default pattern running in the back of my mind that I needed to be afraid of these things. And so I would make decisions and choose people that usually would make it come to pass. So
Mm.
that's what I mean. And I'd love to hear your take on that. Have you experienced the same thing? The difference between a natural fear, which is very real. There's a massive spider 3 feet from me. I'm freaked out, right?
Mm.
Versus
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm afraid to live my life because of something that may never happen. What do you think about that?
Mm. Yeah, I think that's a there's a major difference between them. Like I also have, this natural fear for snakes, for example, because happen to come from Nigeria, and where I grew up, there were a lot of snakes, basically just
Yeah.
crawling around, and I was just scared of them, basically. And but then unnatural fear, like you perfectly described, to come from us being, maybe scared of things that might not even happen because we were traumatized in the past, for example, or because we are people pleasing. I would say my kids, because I would think, what would this person say? What would this person think? I hope I won't hurt someone's feeling if I take this step or take that step. And that's where, you have that fear, basically, of progressing in life or taking the step that you really want to take. So those are for me, like, that's an example, like an abstract
Yeah.
example to say, yeah, yeah, to give a
Yeah. I'm glad
difference.
you brought that one up, because it's funny. I can use a couple of examples of what this even looks like in a really simple way. I was actually in Lagos, Nigeria. I want to say it was 2005, 2006. But anyway, it was many years ago. And we were walking along
Yeah.
these grounds, and I was told that these big holes in the ground were cobra pits. Well, that freaked me out.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. And so
Yeah.
we had an event there, and so we're moving these chairs around, and this stack of chairs
Mm.
was right on top of these holes where these cobras supposedly go in and out of. I was a little freaked out by that, right? But
Yeah.
there was another thing that happened too. We were in a car, and we were driving out to where we were going to hold this event, and a mosquito came into
Mm.
the car. Now that doesn't sound
Mm.
near as scary to me as a cobra. But what ended up
Yeah.
happening was a friend who was in that car completely freaked out, was panicking,
Mm.
practically climbing out of the car because
Mm.
he was so afraid that, one, that mosquito may bite him, And two, if it did, that he may end up with malaria or some sort of other sickness or disease from mosquito.
Yeah.
And for me, those two things are very different, and so I just remember a few of us were laughing about it, but it was like, that's how we live our life sometimes. And that's what happened even with COVID with some people. So afraid of this, in this case, a virus that may or may not ever actually impact you in a big way. And please, for those of you listening, this is not a political statement. I'm just talking factually here. And I know there have been people that suffered from it, but there was also a lot of people who literally lived gripped in fear and wouldn't even go outside, wouldn't even go visit their family members. I know people who wouldn't even go visit elderly family because of the fact that they thought there's a chance that something could happen. And meanwhile, that person passed away alone without their family. To me, that's tragic. And so I don't want to get political, Toby. That wasn't my intent there, but I just think that there's these fears that happen through maybe real things. The virus was real. Going to downtown Dallas, where I live here in Texas, late at night. Okay, something could happen. Someone could attack me, but I can't live my life and stay inside my own home and locked away from the world if I really want to live. Right? You've got to be willing to take some risks in life. And so to me, that mindset is one of the biggest things that I gained from especially losing my son, Gabriel, is that he was willing to take risks. Now, flying, that risk ultimately did end up taking his life. But I've been asked the question, if I could go back and change it, would I have not allowed him to fly? Now, obviously, that's a question that on one level is ridiculous because we can't change it, right? But the truth is, I wouldn't have changed it. I wouldn't have changed it. Now, had I known that day, had I known that flight, if I had that kind of information that something bad could happen, sure. But his pursuit of that, I wouldn't have changed a thing. Why? Because that was his adventure. That was a calculated risk he was willing to take to chase his dream, and he was living his dream. And that's the point I want to get across to people. Whatever your dream is, maybe it's to have a thriving marriage and your marriage is just in shambles right now. You can fix it. You can get through it. You can learn new ways to communicate. You can learn new ways to deal with unforgiveness, whatever it happens to be. You've been afraid to open that business and you're going to live the rest of your life regretting it. Open the business. What's the worst that could happen? The worst that could happen is that it fails, you learn something, and then maybe you start something new.
Yeah.
That's what we're talking about here.
Yes. So, Clint, if I'm understanding you correctly, well, for me to move from being a fearful person to becoming a courageous person, I just have to go for it and just take the risk and just see where I end up. If I win, then I win. If I don't win, then I learn a lesson from that.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
That's the way life was meant to be lived. And I think I'm glad you emphasize that, because another thing I think we should point out is so many people are afraid of failure.
Yeah.
Period. Now, I also believe some people are afraid of success because they feel like if they're successful one time, are they going to be able to do it again? So I do think that's a real thing as well. But fear of failure is by far and away more of an epidemic. And we have to let that go, Toby. You mentioned earlier something about letting some things go. That's one thing we have to let go. Nobody has ever accomplished anything great on this planet. I don't care what it is, if it's an invention, if it's something that impacted people, if it's a huge business that they built. No one on the face of the planet has ever done that without failing along the way. The difference is they didn't quit. They didn't quit. They didn't give in to the fear.
Yes, don't give in to the fear. And that lesson from me from this episode. Do not give in to the fear. Just take the risk and go for it. Yeah.
That's right.
Well, yeah, but in this world where we have a lot of opportunities around us and we have a lot of things that have happened to us, fortunately or fortunately, and that shapes the decisions that we make or the way we see things basically. So how is it possible for, or how can we recognize opportunities and possibilities where others see like closed doors, basically? Like, for example, in your case of writing a book, I think that's an opportunity that you saw. Or other people might think, oh, you experiencing a loss is a closed door to you maybe giving birth to more children, or I don't know, or you getting married again after a failed marriage, for example, or business, having a failed business might mean to some people no more business or no more opportunities for them. How can we recognize opportunities and possibilities where others see closed doors?
Well, I think one perspective that I know I have carried over the years, even in my tough times where, I did sometimes give in to fear.
Mm,
That is that as long as I have breath, it's not over. So that's one
mm,
thing, as long as I have breath, it is not over. Now, as to what you decide to put your hands to, one of the things that I
mm,
love to do, and I'll challenge people when I'm giving a corporate talk, or if it's in front of a church, because I still speak in front of churches as well. I'll challenge
mm,
people. But if I'm in a coaching setting where it's a one-on-one or a smaller group, one of the things that I love to do is I love to challenge people, write down, what is it if there was nothing, and this is a question other people have asked, right? If you knew you couldn't fail, what would you be doing? What would your life look like? No
mm,
filters, not overthinking it, just what would that look like? What types of things would you be doing? And
mm,
that's a helpful exercise, because that was something even I did, even though I enjoyed pastoring for 17 years and many of the things that went with that. I had other pursuits, including, becoming an author and doing some corporate speaking as well, being able to help people regardless if they were faith-based or not, things like that. Those were questions I asked myself, and
mm,
realized that it was never going to happen if I didn't make a courageous decision to go ahead and start pursuing that. And then I
mm,
think another thing along with that, besides asking yourself and writing out, what do I really want to do? Because until you know what you want to do, it doesn't do any good to talk about how to get anywhere, right? I mean, it's funny. A
yeah.
lot of times you see on social media, Instagram, all these places, 5 ways to do this, 10 ways to do that. And it's always about how to make money, how to build this huge business. But it rarely ever talks about the why for that person. Why do
Mm,
you want to do that?
mm,
So I think until you know why you want to do something, you're going to be really limited. But once you do know, then you can start stepping out, getting coaching, going to school if you need a degree for it, whatever it happens to be, you can start learning how to actually do it. And that's all really important. But I'm going to go back to something we talked about earlier, which I think is just as critical, and that is who you surround yourself with. I know I said
mm.
that already, but it bears repeating.
Yes.
When I started to write the book, I had many people that I had talked to about it, let them kind of know the kind of book that I wanted to write and why I was writing it and what I was
Mm,
hoping would come out of it. I had conversations with people that I trusted about that. And I got two great things out of that. I got encouragement, which I needed because there were times when it wasn't easy. So we
mm,
need that encouragement. But I also got some great ideas. And in some cases, people who told me, yeah, I don't know about that. Have you considered this? They
mm,
thought differently about what I was trying to do than I did. And in some
mm.
cases, it turned out, wow, that's a really great idea. I need to incorporate that into it. So
Yeah.
incorporating others too into this
Mm,
pursuit of life, of this pursuit of living big, bold, brave, is absolutely critical. You can't do it by yourself. Well, I mean, you could, but I really believe that you're never going to be the fullness of who you were intended to be. I believe you're never going to accomplish that end goal the way you were meant to be without collaborating with other people.
yes, I believe that too. We need the support of other people around us, our mentors, coaches like yourself, most important, people like you, to live out our dreams, to also, pick ourselves up back whenever we even fall off on our path of fulfilling our passions in life. Because we could be driven, but it's not all the time or all the day that we have that passion and that motivation to pursue our dreams. We need people to support us and to pick us up back up whenever we fall down. Yeah. So I know we've talked so much about your book. I just love you to tell people out there, tell the listeners out there the best way to get your book, the best way to get across to you. Maybe if they have more questions to ask that we didn't cover in this conversation.
Yeah, well, the book is simple as far as, especially with the international audience that we have. Going to
Mm.
Amazon is probably going to be the easiest way for most people. It's available anywhere books are sold online, so there's lots of other places. But Amazon, that tiny little company that most of the world is aware of, is probably the easiest way to
Yeah.
do that. But what I love is, go to bigboldbrave.us. That's my website. That's where
Mm.
you can connect with me. And if you want to bring me in to speak to, I'm really excited. I can't say who it is because that's confidential information, but have a really
Yeah.
exciting talk about some of the stuff that you and I just talked about that I'm going to be doing
Mm.
with this global company in about a week and a half. And there's going to be people literally all over the world. This is a virtual talk, people from
Mm.
all over the world on it. Super excited about that as we not only as I bring content that's expiring because I want to
Mm.
inspire people, but also give them some real tools on how to walk this out. Because we've just touched on some things here. Obviously, we don't have the time to go into
Yeah.
detail on everything we're talking about, but you can go there
Exactly.
to my website, bigboldbrave.us, and look at how to do that. If you're interested
Mm.
in coaching, of course, there's information on how to connect me there as well. And then I also have a weekly newsletter I started doing, Toby, that I would encourage
Mm.
everyone to sign up for. I only send out one a week. I hate clutter. I hate getting a gazillion emails, so I'm not going to load you up either. But once a week, I send out just some free content. Often it
Mm.
involves, things that I've discovered from other people too. It's not just hearing from me, things that I've learned
Mm.
about. Maybe it's a TED talk, maybe it's a great book, just some sort of resource that can point people to something that could really radically transform their lives. So I would encourage them to do that as well.
Awesome. I'm going to put the link to your website in the show notes of this episode. So I encourage everyone out there who has listened thus far to just click on the link, copy the link, get across to Clint, get the book also. It's a great read. And, you don't know, you could share with your friend or share with your loved ones and also help them to overcome their fears and help them to become even bigger and bolder and even much more brave. Thank you so much, Clint. I really appreciate this conversation that we had so far. You taught me so much about overcoming fear. You taught me so much about, taking risk, basically, just go for it. And whatever the outcome is you learn from it or you basically win. I really appreciate this conversation. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I do too. I really appreciate it. And I looked forward to this conversation. I love what you're doing. What you're doing is so important. And you're bringing on some great guests. I've seen some of the different topics and listened to some myself that you're doing. And for those who are listening, you need to share this episode. You need to share some of the other episodes that Toby has done with some of his great guests, because this show is really making a difference in people's lives. So thank you for what you do.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. I appreciate that so much.